Okay, good morning, everyone, and a really warm welcome to this morning's biodiversity webinar. Fantastic to see so many of you join, and thank you very much for your time this morning. My name's Alice from LEAF, and I'll be your chair today. And we're here to talk about biodiversity, about nature, about wildlife. And as I sit here on a sunny spring morning, nothing seems like a better subject to talk about. Specifically, we're here to talk about what LEAF and what LEAF farmers are doing about it. We all know the worrying trends around biodiversity, and we're here to talk to people today who are really working hard on the ground, on farm, to reverse some of those. So we're going to hear from some farmers and experts about how they're managing what they've got, how they're encouraging what they want, and how to make it work for them. Before I go too much further, I'd just like to mention that there are basis points for today. So if you'd like to collect them, then please put your basis number in the chat and we'll get those assigned to you. And also just to flag that we're recording today, so just to flag that's going ahead to be shared. So as I say, we're here today to talk about biodiversity, but for us at LEAF, anyone who knows us will know that nothing happens in isolation. And it's all part of an integrated farm management approach. How does managing biodiversity in one area affect the rest of your farm, affect your farm practice, influence what you do in other areas, and where are the benefits, where are the win-wins, and where are some of the trade-offs? So to unpick this, we're pulling work from two key LEAF projects that are going on at the moment. And more specifically, we're pulling on the advisors, the farmers and the researchers that are involved in those. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two main slots. So you're going to hear a bit from me and then a bit from my colleague India about the other project, and then on to the main meat of the session, where we'll hear from two speakers and then have time for questions, and then another two speakers and then have time for more questions. But having said that, please do put any questions you have in the chat at any point, and then we'll pull from those when we've got those sessions. So I hope that sounds okay. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about that first project that we're going to be pulling from today, and that is called Resilient and Ready. So Resilient and Ready is a partnership between LEAF, between LEAF and our pals at Corteva Agriscience, between 4 farms and a really wide range of experts. It's a 3-year program, and it's working on each farm, looking to catalyse change, to really build confidence and work collaboratively to catapult those farms to be more resilient and absolutely ready for the changes that are coming and the brave new world that we all know farming is facing. What that actually looks like on farm is each farm's working with a range of experts, so soil, biodiversity, and others. Some Corteva-led trials looking at where their products and their work can focus on a sustainable future for farms, and a wide range of training, which, as you can imagine, more have been online than we thought, but a really wide range of training. So a couple of farms have done the beta conservation course with Basis this year, as well as lots of other stuff coming through. Also looking at LEAF tools, so looking at the LEAF Sustainable Farming Review, how can we use that to really make change on farm, the integrated farm management training, and a whole range of all the LEAF fabulous work that LEAF farmers do. So I like to think of it in many ways then as LEAF zoomed in, and it's taking all the work that LEAF's been doing for 30 years now, and thinking actually if we really zoom in on that in 3 years, essentially throw the kitchen sink at it, what change can we catapult and quickly, and what does that look like? And then at the end of it, hopefully all 4 farms will become LEAF demonstration farms to really continue this work and wider legacy of what they've learned on that programme, and how they can continue to work with that. So today you're going to hear from 2 of those fabulous farmers, Andy Basin in Hampshire and Harriet Ross up in Aberdeenshire. And you're also going to hear from Tamsin Morris, who's one of the wildlife experts that we're working with. The absolutely great news is there's a prize today for the best question that's asked to anyone, wins half a day's advice from Tamsin. Tamsin is based in Aberdeenshire, so she's mentioned that if you're in Scotland or somewhere exotic, that half day's advice will be on site, on farm. If you're in somewhere less exotic and far away, it may well be online. But yes, some opportunity there to kind of bounce some ideas across. The second project we're going to talk a little bit about today is Showcase, and we'll be hearing from fabulous Professor Simon Potts a bit more on that and the detailed work going on in that later. But I'm just going to pass to my colleague India, who's going to introduce Showcase and LEAF's involvement. India, over to you.
Great, thank you, Alice. I'll just share my screen. Great, so good morning, everybody. I'm India Grantwood and I'm a technical assistant at LEAF. I work with the University of Reading on the Showcase project, which looks to integrate farming with biodiversity. Today, I'll just be giving a really quick overview of the project, the timeline, and the stage that we're at the moment. So the real key focus of the Showcase project is to make biodiversity a more integral part of British and European farming. So it's a Horizon 2020 project, so it's European-wide and involves 10 different EU countries. I will just be focusing on the UK part of the project today, though. So in this project, we'll be looking to generate evidence for a range of benefits that biodiversity can deliver both farmers and the wider society. We'll also be co-developing an intervention to enhance biodiversity and production benefits simultaneously, and also look to identify incentives and barriers for adopting biodiversity promoting practices. So this will all be done by creating a UK EBA, or Experimental Biodiversity Area, to co-design practices, demonstrate benefits, and showcase new pathways to integrate biodiversity more deeply in farming. So in the UK, this will involve 15 to 20 arable farmers. We're currently at the end of the selection process for these farmers, which will be part of the co-design process and implement the intervention on their farm. So this Showcase project really links in well with what Alice said earlier, so identifying what you've got, what you want, and how to make it work for you. So as I said, we are just coming to the end of our selection process. And as part of this, we have a survey on what farmers currently have on farm to just identify that. We also will be doing some pre-intervention sampling and post-intervention sampling to really measure and quantify the impact and benefits to ecosystem services, wildlife, and productivity. Sorry. Another selection criteria of this is really identifying what the farmers actually want to see on their farm and test on a part of their farm, as this will be really key in the co-design discussions between the farmers, University of Reading, and any other relevant external stakeholders. And as we said, a really key part of this is integrating biodiversity with productive farming. So it's really important to ensure that whatever intervention is chosen is both realistic and suitable for the farm business, the landscape, and also the timescale of the project. We will also be looking to generate some outputs at the end of this project, so over the next 4 years. And for farmers, this will be generating biodiversity lists and a long-term biodiversity plan. We also want to make it work for others as well. So we'll be looking to create a handbook of best practice, guidance on code design, scientific papers, and various media outputs. So that was really just a whistle-stop tour of the Showcase project. We are coming to the end of selecting our intervention farms, but there are various levels of involvement. So if you are interested at all, or just interested to see how the project unfolds over the next few years, please have a look at our Twitter, have a look at the Showcase project website, or drop me an email. Or Simon Potts will be speaking about this as well later. So thank you very much, Alice, and back to you.
Thanks very much, India. And yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a brief flavour about the projects and what they're about. But of course, the source of this work is of course happening on farm, yeah, that's really where the real action is. So firstly, we're going to talk about what you've got, you know, how to start, what to look for first. And to talk about this, we're going to transport you up to Aberdeenshire to hear first from Harriet Ross. So we've been working with Harriet and her partner Ben through Resilient and Ready for the last year or so. Harriet and Ben took on their tenancy in the summer of 2019. So in some ways we're starting afresh, and I've asked her to talk a bit about that and how they got started looking at biodiversity and nature with a relatively blank canvas, if you like, in terms of getting to know the farm and what's going on and what's happening with the biodiversity on it. So Harriet, can I pass over to you to talk about that?
Yeah, super. Thanks, Alice. I'll just get my presentation. Okay, morning everybody. Hopefully you can see my presentation there. Like Alice said, we farm up in Aberdeenshire, and we started farming back in 2019 when we were very lucky to get the tenancy at New Sea Upton Breck. We're mainly an arable focused business, growing a mixture of crops, and we also have some temporary grass that we sort of rotate around the farm for a local AD plant. We also have quite a lot of sheds, so we have diversified most of them now to house nursery pigs, so that we have about 2,500 places now for the nursery pigs. It helps keep muck and straw on the farm and helps us with a monthly income. We also work closely, my family farm is about 5 miles away, so we work closely with them, share machinery, share contracting, opportunities that come up, so that's working well. And like Alice said, we joined the Resilient and Ready programme just over a year ago now, really just to help us mould our new business, make it future proof for whatever happens next in the agricultural world, and yeah, make it as sustainable as possible. So moving on to our biodiversity and our vision for it on the farm, as Alice said, we really are starting with a blank canvas, and this year has been really about fact finding, what we've got. The farm was a dairy farm, so it's been quite intensively farmed. Although there is a lot of grass, and muck in the past, it is, very much an open landscape. We're on a hill, so we're quite exposed to the elements as well. So initially, Ben and I thought that was maybe a bad thing, that we were so open and lacking in that diversity, but actually Tamsin came out and did a biodiversity survey for us, and we actually have species that it's benefited, like water voles and corn buntings. So not all was that bad, and what we would like to do, sort of our vision for the future, is apply for any sort of agri-environment schemes that are coming up. There is one currently that we're looking to go into, targeting the corn buntings. We're quite lucky to have them in the area, so we want to help keep them here, and also just to increase, our whole species habitat throughout the farm. We have a few permanent grassland fields that we would, maybe a bit lower in fertility, that we would like to reseed into species-rich grassland, create wider water margins for the water voles. And it's really about utilising areas and enhancing areas that we would, otherwise underutilise, and maybe, work in things with our arable system. And for example, we put in some pollinator mixes last year on fallow areas, and that worked really well. So that was sort of headlands of fields that were not doing so well, arable fields, and yeah, the pollinator mixes worked great, and we're a hive of activity with the bees and butterflies, and also maybe create some more enclosed spaces through planting some trees or hedges as well. And then moving on to sort of the challenges we've experienced over the past year, being a tenant farmer, we've had to work with our landlords, you know, and work with their vision as well. So it's about, you know, definitely having that conversation with them. And it is sort of long-term changes that we're thinking of. So we were on quite a short-term tenancy to begin with, but we've actually been changed onto a longer-term one. So that just gives us that security, and now we can do business plans, you know, that are 5-10 years in advance. So we can actually, you know, have the money, you know, invest it, and have that security that we're going to be there for the long run. And also it works well with the landlord, because they know, you know, if we go into any schemes that are typically about 5 years in length, you know, we'll be here for the duration. So we'll, you know, we want to manage it, and, you know, it won't put any sort of pressure on another tenant coming in. And Alice just wanted me to chat about advice that I would give somebody sort of wanting to become a bit more biodiversity on their farm. And I would say, yeah, definitely my advice is to get advice, you know, as much as you can, and not just from professionals, but also from other farmers who are maybe doing it in the area, and just gather as much information as possible you can about your farm and where it can work in. You know, it's got to be practical. At the end of the day, you know, the farming business has got to make money, it's got to be profitable. So I think that's a big part of it as well. And we're lucky that we've got an agricultural college not too far away. So we've actually had a couple of students come out and, you know, have done bird surveys for us. And that all just adds to the bigger picture and allows us to make decisions to benefit what's required. And you can actually see on the right hand here, that picture is one of our headlands last year, a Phacelia mix. So yeah, that worked really well. And that's me. Back over to you, Alice.
Thanks very much, Harriet. And yeah, great to hear a bit about sort of priorities and parameters in terms of the wildlife working with the farm and that integrating together, as well as some of your visions around that. I'd just like to say that Harriet and Ben both also have off-farm jobs, and if you want any inspiration of how much you can physically achieve with an open attitude and a want to do things, then Harriet and Ben have certainly been a massive inspiration to me. And they've got a new Instagram channel, so if you've or a profile, so if you'd like to hear more and see it, get a bit more insight, then HB Farms, I think it is on Instagram. So so yeah, just big shout out to what they're doing up there. So as Harriet said, her first piece of advice would be to take advice, which I always think is a good start. So with that in mind, we're going to next hear from Tamsin Morris. So Tamsin is a wildlife specialist and a really crucial part of the Resilient and Ready team. Big part of my role is pulling together people that can actually know what they're talking about, as opposed to me, and pulling them in at the right place at the right time to really try and make some of these changes that farmers like Harriet are wanting to do. So Tamsin's been working closely with Harriet and Ben, as well as Craig and Claire, our other Resilient and Ready farmers in Aberdeenshire. And I've asked Tamsin to talk a bit about how she approaches a new business, what she focuses on, and what sort of background she does. So Tamsin, can I pass over to you?
Hello, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yep, we can.
Yes, so hello, I'm Tamsin Morris. I am a freelance ecologist trading as Walking the Talk. I've been freelance since about 2008, and before that I worked for the Scottish Government. And a large part of the work that I do is agri-environment schemes. I do those across Scotland really, so that ranges from some small crofts up in Orkney through to some of the more traditional Aberdeenshire arable farms, through some of the Cairngorms, the large moorland estates. So there's quite a broad range of landscapes, but Leif asked me to visit these two farms in Aberdeenshire, one of which was Newseat, Harriet's farm, and to look at the biodiversity that was present there and try and get a feel for what wildlife was there and what could be there. So I was just going to spend, as Alice says, a few minutes just looking at the approach that I take when I go to a new farm, and have a look at how that worked out at Newseat. So with a bit of luck, I can share this, hopefully. Maybe, can we all see that okay? Super. So yeah, the first thing I do is start very much by looking at the farm context. So in this example, obviously you can see here's the map of Newseat, but I also like to look at where the farm is in the surrounding landscape. So you can see the farm here, the boundary just there, and the broader landscape around it. And that helps to kind of set a context of not just what I might expect to find on the farm, but what should be in the area around, and therefore what I might expect to find from a wildlife point of view that could be on the farm if maybe things were tweaked or changed, or different things could be improved. So it's helpful to kind of see not just the farm, but that broader context of the area around about. And I then go onto the farm and look at the habitats that are actually there, and that gives me an idea of what wildlife could be there. So I may not see things on the day because it's inevitably raining, but if you can see what habitats are there, you can work out what wildlife you might expect to be present on the farm. And I also take that time to have a chat with the farmer and to try and work out what are they seeing. Obviously, I'm just there for one day, it's just a snapshot, but the farmer is obviously there all the time. So whatever they're seeing helps me to build up a picture of what's there. And usually speak to them as well to try and work out what would they like to see in terms of wildlife. Are there things that they really want to benefit? And are there things that they want to improve or change with their farming business, where maybe there'll be scope for linking up between biodiversity improvements and things that they want to change and improve anyway. So to look at that process on Newseat, as Harriet pointed out, it's quite an open landscape. Farm's been intensively managed in the past, so it's got pretty limited wildlife habitat at the moment. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. And because of the particular context of this farm, because of it being in Northeast Scotland, I know that there's scope there for species which would benefit from that open landscape. And that could actually thrive in what we might look at as perhaps not the most exciting landscape. So one of the obvious examples, as Harriet mentioned, waterfoals. Waterfoals are hanging on in Northeast Scotland as best they can, declining quite a lot elsewhere. And a lot of the burns and the ditches on Newseat look kind of like this. And I agree, that's not your typical beautiful river with dappled shade from glorious mature broadleaf trees and some sparkling water. And don't get me wrong, that's fantastic habitat when you see it. But actually, waterfoals look at this kind of thing and they quite like the fact that there aren't trees everywhere, which could hide predators like buzzards. So they've got this really lush vegetation on both banks. And actually, for a waterfowl, this is pretty good habitat. So we spent some time with me upside down in the ditches, having a look to see if we can find some evidence of waterfoals, which we did, and that's great to see. And so talking with Harriet and Ben, we've been looking at, are there ways to improve those water margins, make them even better for wildlife, even better for the waterfoals? And that has the potential to have benefits in terms of helping with diffuse pollution as well. So there's kind of a double win there. So that's one of the things that we found there. One of the other species that likes these open landscapes is the corn bunting. Harriet was very politely saying she was excited about those. To be honest, I tend to look at them as kind of a dull brown bird, but they are also declining massively. And they also like these very open landscapes, big lush grassland fields, which perhaps don't have trees all round about. And the benefit from Harriet and Ben's point of view is that there is potential for having those birds present to help to unlock agri-environment funding. So again, there's things we can look at going forwards in terms of tweaking the management of how those fields are cut at the moment for silage, looking at maybe changing cutting dates a wee bit, and looking at bringing in biodiversity funding through agri-environment schemes for that. So that'll give you a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the things we found at Newseat, and I think it shows it's really important to know what you've got on your farm when you start. So you need to have a good feel for what's there and what could be there, given the landscape and the habitats that you've got and the location where you are. And you can then take that information and try and move on and say, okay, well, what do I want to change? What do I want to improve? What would I ideally like to see here? But knowing what you've got at the start certainly helps you to build that picture. So I think that's everything that I was planning to say. Shall I pass back to you, Alice?
Yes, thanks very much, Tamsin. I feel like we're in a new studio. That was brilliant, and I think so many echoes there of what we talk about with LEAF and integrated farm management all the time in terms of it's about being site specific. you know, we're not in the Cotswolds, and Aberdeenshire has a wonderful habitat and landscape, and it's about working with that and the habitat and the wildlife that habitat supports, and making those tweaks, having the right thing, the right place at the right time, not just not sometimes not the most obvious things, but are still very beneficial for wildlife. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tamsin, for that, and I hope you get a flavour for sort of how we're working with experts and with the farmers to kind of take some of those ideas forward. Claire, you've been very kindly said you'll help me with some questions today. Have we had some come in, or can I ask mine first?
We've got some come in, Alice, so I prefer to answer those first, if that's okay, and then we can move on to yours.
That sounds fine. So questions to Harriet, Tamsin, and also to India, who spoke earlier. So Claire.
Yeah, so a great question here in terms of the economic benefits of biodiversity. So what is the cost benefit and economic impact of farming for biodiversity? Or perhaps we can frame that slightly differently. What are some of the things that we can be doing in that space, trying to kind of not monetize biodiversity, but to try and maximize and optimize all of the benefits that biodiversity and habitat can bring?
Great question. We'll be hearing even more on that a bit later from Simon as well. But Tamsin, I wonder if I could come to you first on that question. So some of those kind of, we've talked about how it fits and it's got to be profitable, as Harriet said, but any kind of examples of that kind of economic side of biodiversity?
I guess there's two sides really. There's the kind of agricultural support system side, which is probably your hard cash, if you like, element. So you might have species there which enable you to access agri-environment funding. Depending on the type of farm you've got, that may be a complete lifeline. Certainly some of the sort of smaller farms I work with in Orkney, that really is a massive part of their farm business. Perhaps for other farms that may not be so significant, or it may be that the constraints of the scheme are more than the benefits for you as an individual farming business. And I think if that's the case, you then need to look perhaps more broadly at some of the other benefits, which are probably harder to put a single pound value on, if you like, or euro value on. But things like, for example, when we were talking about the waterfalls, if we can widen the water margins there and leave a wider strip next to the burn, that helps Harriet and Ben be covered in terms of diffuse pollution legislation. It helps them avoid any diffuse pollution issues because they've got that strip along the burn to protect the watercourse itself. Or you can look at things like your species-rich grassland. Obviously, if you're bringing in more pollinators, that's going to be a benefit if you've got oilseed rape crops and that sort of thing. So I think there's kind of the hard cash value that maybe we've all got a bit distracted by in the past because the support system has forced us into that. And maybe what we need to be looking at a bit more now is the things that perhaps have benefits for the farm in terms of soil structure or diffuse pollution or pollinators or whatever it is, the kind of ecosystem services, to use the trendy buzzword. But they may be actually the benefits that in the long term are more important for the farm because they're not limited to or not constrained within a support system.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Tamsin. I think that touches on lots of the sort of the beneficial impacts in both structured system and more broadly across the farm. Harriet, did you want to come in on that at all?
I think the same as Tamsin really, and we're sort of at the start. So I can't really tell you, cash wise how it's benefited or if it's detrimented the business overall. But just thinking about things that we've done is areas that the farm's not making us money at the moment, and we can enhance that, both through and get more money for it, but also enhance biodiversity. So it is a win-win, through going in for like species rich grass, we're increasing the pollinators, but we're also, we can get paid for that as well. So it's, a double bonus for us if it's in a scheme.
Cool. Thanks very much, Harriet. And as I say, Simon's going to be talking on quite a lot on that topic in terms of the economics on it in the next session. So we'll maybe bring that question back up again if that's all right. Claire.
Thank you, that's brilliant. A question specifically about the Showcase project, so perhaps one for India or potentially Simon. You mentioned that it includes 15 to 20 arable farmers. It would be interesting to know what the thinking is about why it's specifically arable, and kind of, I suppose, following on from that, what learnings could be taken for other enterprises or farming systems, for example, livestock, mixed farms, fruit farms, etc.
India, are you happy to answer that one?
Yeah, I can kind of answer, and Simon, please do come in with anything else as well. So it is a European-wide project, so other countries won't be just specifically on arable, so there is that kind of mix over different countries. So the outputs will be varied on sector. I think in terms of learning, the co-design process especially will be really valuable and can be used across sectors. But for the UK, it was chosen to be arable as it's more comparable if it's everyone in the same sector, and a real key part of this project is it's going to be one intervention. So it's kind of really making sure that that's kind of the same across the board. And that's not to say it's just arable farms in this, because the intervention will be implemented on part of the farm. So it may be a mixed farm, and this will be done on the arable part of the farm. So it's not exclusively arable farms, but it will be done on that arable side of the farm. Simon, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think that's a very good summary. I think to be practical, we have to start somewhere. And so picking one particular farming type is the way we're going to go. It's a 5-year project, and actually we've dedicated the final year to really pull together the learnings, not only from UK farmers and researchers, but also comparable farms in Europe. And one of the key outputs will be a handbook. How do you replicate this kind of approach of co-design that benefits both farmers and wildlife? How do we apply that more widely, and how do we scale this up? So that's kind of integral part of the project. We'd love to work on fruit systems and livestock systems as well, but we have to be practical and start somewhere. So we picked arable initially, but we're not leaving anybody out in the end.
Thanks very much, both. Yeah, Claire?
Thank you very much. A great question here. Does the panel think there is potentially an over-focus on that kind of physical biodiversity, physically visible biodiversity? And are we missing a trick on the micro beasts? I love that term, by the way, the micro beasts, which are recycling the nutrients and are sitting at the base of that supply chain. And if so, if we are missing a trick there, how could we redress that? Great
question. Biodiversity in its many forms. Tamsin, have you got any thoughts on that to kick us off?
Yes, I think you're totally right. I think we can do a lot to focus on soils. I guess my background is not as a soil ecologist, so I very much focused on the above ground thing and put in pictures of nice, cute, cuddly things, because we all like to see a cuddly thing. But yes, I do think there's scope for looking more at soil biodiversity, and I think perhaps part of the problem is that those things have been quite hard for other people to measure. And I think some of the new things that are coming along, so I know there's a scheme at the moment where you bury a pair of pants in your soil for 3 weeks and then have a look to see if your pants have decomposed. Am I sounding a bit weird here? But that gives you an idea of what's going on in your soil. I think those kind of things will start to get more focus on what's going on below ground. But at the moment, yeah, I think we tend to focus on the stuff we can see, because that's human nature.
Thanks, Tamsin. Yeah, I think Soil My Andes had a good good traction, and I think we might have one of the original perpetrators on the call. Yeah, it's a good way of drawing attention to that kind of wider impact of biodiversity. So I think that's really key. Harriet, I know you do a lot of work in this area, and Ben also is an agronomist. So I imagine that's a kind of key focus for you guys as well.
Yeah, definitely. Soil health is probably our #1 priority on the farm, and that's why we have our rotational grass, just to allow the organic matter to build up the soil structure. We're looking at different drill types to sort of alleviate moving any soil that's unnecessary. Yeah, we do worm counts, you know, to sort of establish, you know, different systems, how they work, and how we can sort of establish grass and then take it back into arable production. So definitely something we're keen on looking at, and it is, like Tamsin said, sometimes hard to measure, but definitely we're looking at organic matter content as sort of one of our big things that we are assessing when we're looking at soil health.
Brilliant,
and
thanks.
Biodiversity can, you know, help with that. If we can help keep grass in the rotation, or keep other, you know, beneficials, you know, predating on prey that that come and eat our crops, then definitely it's a win-win.
Brilliant, thanks. Thanks very much, Harriet. And again, you know, it all comes back to the whole farm approach and how it all interacts. Claire, could we have one more question? I've seen some brilliant ones coming in, but I'm keen to hear from, we're going to then hear from Andy and Simon, and then we might bring back some of these questions, because I'm keen to get Andy and Simon involved in the discussion too. So if we could have one more for now, that'd be brilliant.
Absolutely, that's great, and really loving the humour going off in the thread as well. Thank you all about pants. A really good question here, and I'd like to ask it in this section, because we've got obviously Harriet and Tamsin who are in Aberdeenshire. How do we get that consistency of approach where we've got devolved government? So, for example, you might be a grower in Scotland, but you're supplying a customer in England. Do we have any thought? I mean, it might not be a question for this panel at all, but do we have any thoughts about how you can balance that, you know, challenge that there might be different requirements in different territories?
Quite the question, and we touched on this when we were talking about it the other day in terms of the very different agri-environment schemes, which there's quite a different setup and what the challenges with that are. Harriet, would you be happy to from your point of view, I don't know where your produce goes, so by no means if you know if it's not relevant then to you, but if you've got any thoughts on that, then it would be interesting to hear them.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. No, I think we all have, you know, the same end goal, you know, and whether, you know, up here in Scotland, our future agricultural policy, you know, we don't know what it is yet. So we can only be led to believe that it's going to follow suit to something similar to the rest of the UK. So I think if we all have, you know, the same goal of, you know, in that big sort of cycle of an umbrella, I suppose, of environmental benefits, and you know, public money for public good is that word. So I think if we have that in mind, then, you know, hopefully we can be able to trade where we like. But yeah, who knows what's
who indeed. And yeah, same ideals, but yeah, slightly different way of getting there. Would this be a good point to mention, Claire, that Leaf Mark is obviously a global scheme, so looking at kind of uniformity across the piece, that you know, for us, that the principles very much the same as we've seen from Harriet's farm in Aberdeenshire, and what Tamsin mentioned about what, you know, what good looks like there is different in different places, and that's how the Leaf Mark is designed to very much reflect that and allow for those differences, but the same sort of approach. Did you want to say something on that, Claire?
No, that was an excellent plug. Well done. Exactly that you know, having that flexibility to be able to apply across borders and in different locations and territories is exactly what the Leaf Mark standard is built on. So yeah, do take a look at that. It is available through our website.
Great. Well, as I say, fantastic to see loads of questions and comments coming through, and hopefully pick them up later. But I'm really keen to get Andy Basin and Simon Potts involved in the discussion, because they've got loads of interesting stuff going on as well. So firstly, we're going to hear from Andy Basin. Andy is farm manager at Newhouse Farms in Hampshire, and another one of our 4 farms in the Resilient and Ready programme. So we're taking you from Aberdeenshire to England, and even more specifically right onto farm. So we made a film with Andy last week because we really wanted to get the virtual field day element in by taking you on a bit of a virtual tour of the farm. So I'm now going to attempt to share this with sound, so I hope you enjoy.
My name's Andy Bason. I'm the farm manager at Newhouse Farm in Northington, which is near Winchester. The whole farm is 800 hectares and we farm 600 hectares of that as arable. 2 years ago we applied to be part of the Resilient and Ready programme, and luckily we were selected, which was great. My reasoning for wanting to be part of that programme was to get more people onto farm to start with, showcase what we're doing here, also to enhance the biodiversity on the farm, integrate that with the arable farming. They've been quite separate up until now, so I was really keen to combine those two elements of the farm. There are huge changes coming in agriculture, and I was kind of keen to be part of that, I suppose, and ahead of the game, and sort of see where we could take Newhouse Farm as a business and how we could improve the business, integrate the arable with the stewardship, the environmental side of the farm, and push forward sort of into the next stage of farming. So today I'd like to show you around the farm here, one or two sites on the farm which I think you might find interesting. There are places that areas that I'd like to improve the biodiversity or the environmental side of the farming, areas that are probably a bit underutilised, and we'd like to enhance as part of this programme. So here at Newhouse Farm we've got a lot of woodland around us, so we get a lot of deer here, in particular fallow deer, large numbers of fallow deer moving through, and quite fantastic to see. We get roe as well, and also muntjac, which is something I never used to see when I was younger. But my big passion is brown hare, so I love to see brown hares running around the field in 4s and 5s. It's perfect. It's a good sign that we're doing the right thing with our farming practices, and they're not being adversely affected, which is great. You can see here sort of around us we've got various different sort of habitats. We've got a bit of cover here, we've got some new game cover going in, and we've got these wide open arable fields. So all these things are good for encouraging the hare. Also I'd like to do more to encourage barn owls. Barn owls, we've got a couple of pairs here on the farm, but I'd love to do more to encourage them. So I think sort of moving forward, that's my next big thing. If we can sort of put up some boxes and do more to encourage them, that would be great. So as part of this Resilient and Ready programme, we've had access to some experts, and one of those was from Oakbank Game and Conservation. They came out and did a biodiversity survey for us. Spent a day here in the rain, which wasn't very nice for them, but came back with a full report on what we had here, which was great, because you kind of take for granted, I suppose, what you've got around you. But particular fascination was some of the older trees that we've got here on the farm in some of our woodland, which was really nice to hear, but also tips on how we could enhance the biodiversity even further by sort of interconnecting some of the stewardship strips we've got here and some of the hedgerows, planting new trees, planting new hedges, and basically creating corridors for the wildlife to move about the farm. So we're now here in Main Wood at Newhouse Farm. In amongst the trees here we've got this duck pond. It's a traditional flight pond. We do shoot it a couple of times a year, but it's an area on the farm, so it's nice and peaceful, nice and quiet. It's got a little bit of sort of scrubby grass behind here, and actually it's an area that I'd like to take some advice on what we can do to further enhance it, or to at least to sort of maintain what we've got. It sort of seems to me an underutilised area of the farm, and an area that which we could do more with. So that's what I'm looking to do here, sort of going forwards. So we've got 70 hectares of woodland here at Newhouse Farm, predominantly ash actually. A lot of the trees are ash trees, so with the current ash dieback scenario going on, it's a bit of a worry, but we've got a 10-year woodland management plan in place, and we're thinning trees for our 2 biomass boilers here, and where we are thinning, we're sort of focusing on the ash trees there to sort of leave the other species alone. So we're sort of waiting with bated breath to see what happens. So here we are in our field of GS4. It's a herbal ley, part of our mid-tier stewardship. We've got the ewes and lambs out here at the moment grazing, enjoying the grass. It's an option that's got chicory, sainfoin and clovers in it. The ewes and lambs do really well on it. It's got anthelmintic properties, which sort of alleviates the need for wormers, and that's been really successful for us in the past. It's an option that has to be, it's rotational, so we're going to move it this year. In the autumn we'll put a new field in, and hopefully that will be as successful as this one. So now we've arrived in this field of wheat, but amongst this field of wheat we've got a slightly new venture for us. We're having a dabble into agroforestry. Agroforestry, or silver arable as it's also known, is sort of integration of trees into the arable rotation. So what we've got here is 4-metre strips every 30 metres on 30-metre spacing, so we can get our sprayer up and down the rows, in between the rows. And the plan is to plant these strips up with wildflowers, maybe grasses as well, in the autumn, get those established. Those wildflowers and grasses will hopefully host beneficial insects, which will predate on the aphids and bugs that we don't want. And then once that grass and flower mix is established, probably or hopefully sort of later on this year, early next, we will establish some trees in these strips. At the moment, I mean, I'm still learning about agroforestry. There's an awful lot of things to learn. It's a wide-ranging subject. I've been listening to various webinars, listening to people speak, reading books, so all kinds of things really. But yeah, I've still got a lot to learn, and it's a bit of an experiment for Newhouse Farm, but we're really keen to see how it develops. So that's about it from Newhouse Farm today. I really hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour. I hope that you've seen that we love doing all we can to protect and enhance the wildlife here at the farm. I really hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I really hope that you can make it down here sometime soon.
Great. So big thank you to Andy for that and his time and energy producing that last week. And you'll be pleased to hear he's here in real life, well, virtual life, today to answer any questions on that in a moment. I hope that gave you a bit of a feel for the farm and also an indication of how keen Andy is to host people on farm when we can. So big thank you for that. So that was looking at, you know, what you want. So Andy talked a little bit about the species he's looking for, the habitats he's looking to create to enhance, and the connectivity within that. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about how to make it work for you, which we've touched on already. And for this, we're bringing you the best in the business. Professor Simon Potts is from Reading University and leading the work of Showcase. One of Simon's real areas of focus is the impact biodiversity can have on the wider farmed environment. Where are the win-wins and how can we make the most of those? So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. I'll try and get it into presentation mode. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for the invitation to come and join. And wonderful to see the amazing ongoing work from Andy, Harriet and Tamsin. That's what it looks like on the ground, and we need more of that. It's fantastic to see. What I want to do is kind of two things briefly is, first of all, take a small step back and try and understand what we mean by biodiversity, because the term means many different things to many people. And already this kind of started to bubble up in the conversations about biodiversity that is a public good, biodiversity that can deliver private goods on the farm. And it might be really helpful to start to unpick that a little bit. And then I'll just talk about some of the kind of routes forward to really achieve that kind of, what sort of biodiversity do you want on farm and how to get there. So what do we mean by biodiversity? Well, this really came out of a long and complicated set of conversations with a major retailer in the supply chain. I asked 7 or 8 people what they thought biodiversity was, and of course I got 7 or 8 different answers. So it seemed a good starting point to try and put some sort of kind of framework there, so we're all talking about the same thing. And quite a powerful way to address this, we found, was to sort of split biodiversity into kind of two sort of dimensions in terms of like how useful is it first? Does it make a kind of, an important contribution underpinning production and gross margins? Or does it have no impact or maybe even a negative impact on production at the other end? And then the second dimension is, what do we think about it? And particularly, how does the public value biodiversity? In some cases, they love it. I think that, the water vole is a great case. People have a strong attraction to that. But there's also a whole bunch of biodiversity that is either almost entirely overlooked, and I think that's already been brought up by Tamsin very nicely, or even disliked. And that sort of breaks biodiversity up into kind of four sectors. Now, clearly, wildlife doesn't neatly fit into boxes, but it helps us think about it. And if we take something that doesn't really contribute directly to production, but it's generally valued by farmers, the public, and researchers alike, we can call that our iconic wildlife. Farmland birds being a really great example of that. And kind of counter to this, we also have things that are kind of quite popular. Pollinators seem to be super high on the agenda of politicians, of the public at the moment. But these guys obviously do a lot of hard work to, underpin production, particularly in the arable and horticultural sectors, although there are some indirect benefits in livestock sectors as well. And we tend to refer to these as popular helpers. They're well known and they do a really useful job. And I'll come back to the economics of that in a minute. Then we've got what I like to call the forgotten heroes. So these are the guys underground, worms, columbra, our micro beasties, all that stuff which is super valuable, makes massive contribution to production, but is either overlooked or quite often disliked by the public, which is kind of a real barrier actually, because we need to look after these forgotten heroes if we're going to have really good functional farming. And then finally, we have stuff that actually is not really liked, actually can have a negative impact on production, but actually is part of biodiversity. And when we're trying to manage for biodiversity, we clearly want to get the things that do a good job, that stuff on the right, the popular helpers, the forgotten heroes, that stuff that is public goods, the iconic wildlife and popular helpers again. We don't want pests, that's kind of clear. So biodiversity is complex, and it kind of helps to unpack that a little bit about what are its functions. So it's an integral part of farming, and it's going to be increasingly so. And to pick up on this functional biodiversity, all those things on the right-hand side of the previous chart, healthy soils are paramount, natural enemies to control pests, pollinators, those have all been mentioned. And to start putting some economics on that, and we shouldn't only rely on economics, but it's a good, useful starting point, I'd say. For pollinators in the UK, the annual value, added value to production is in the region of £1 billion a year. So that's not trivial, that's £1 billion of extra added value. If we zoom in a little bit closer on pollinators, we did some neat work with our Kentish apple growing colleagues, and we found for just a single variety of apple, Gala, and there's many varieties, on an annual basis there's a £5 million shortfall in production quality of the apples, just because of poor pollination. That's a huge opportunity that can be bridged actually quite easily. And the solutions to that is to spend a small amount of money in putting in things like, high quality flower areas in the corners of orchards or in the strips in between. It's very cheap compared to the uplift in benefits you can get. And this is one of our open days where we're discussing this with farmers. We're starting to do the economics. We can show a small investment in habitat can produce a lot of beneficials, in this case pollinators, and real significant uplift in production. Farm dogs are also welcome on our grower days as well, but it's not essential. But what this does, it underlines the point that actually in many cases, the benefits accrued from well-managed biodiversity outweigh the costs of putting it in. So that's almost a no-brainer business model. If you can get that right, you should consider biodiversity as another agricultural input. If you're going to spend money on your fertilizers, your machinery and stuff, you might want to think about spending a bit of investment in pollinators or natural enemies or soil health approaches, because quite often it more than pays for itself, and there's really good emerging evidence on that. So that's the kind of almost the business case for biodiversity. Of course, we've got the iconic wildlife that doesn't have a direct impact on production, but it's clearly of high value. And we've already touched upon agri-environment type schemes can support that, and can, if you're doing the right things, you can get access. Certification's a no-brainer. I don't need to say anything to the leaf community about this. But also a lot of farmers we work with have a personal investment. They love the wildlife on their farms, and they can see it and they want to support it. And that's also a really important motivation as well. But actually all of these things can line up. You can manage biodiversity to get economic uplift, give you access to agri-environment scheme payments, certification, and it meets maybe your own personal needs. So we should be looking for this alignment, and I think it's becoming easier to do. One of the routes I see forward is co-design, and India very kindly mentioned that earlier on, and it's kind of the backbone of this showcase project. I'm going to start with what is really a bad idea. And I apologize for whoever did this piece of research in the US, but that's a wonderful way of putting in green ditches in a farming system in the US. It works ecologically really well. It's a disaster for any sensible, efficient farm management. Can you imagine trying to work around those green fingers into the fields? Not good. That was led by researchers and didn't really have that interaction with growers. What is really important is that we co-design intervention for biodiversity, that the knowledge held by farmers and the knowledge held by researchers and scientists, you've put that together. You can design new ways of promoting biodiversity that help production, help wildlife, and critically fit neatly within kind of modern production systems. We can design new ways of doing this, and the Showcase project is going to be doing that in an arable context. We can test them together, evaluate their success, what worked, what didn't work, feed that back in, and we can have this cycle of co-design. I think it's a really powerful way to progress, and it's something I know Leaf embrace, and I think increasingly it's going to be a really useful tool to help us get biodiversity integrated in. Another advantage of co-design, we have national targets to increase connectivity to help particular types of wildlife, but the solutions need to be local. Every farm has different soils, it has a different context, a different business model. Co-design lets us tailor those interventions and those solutions to be correct at the local level. And that's so important. There's not one size fits all, we know that. Couple of quick examples. So skylark plots and field margins 15 to 20 years ago, great collaborations we had between the farming community and researchers to design and test these. Farmers pointed out all sorts of worries they had. For instance, that skylark plots would have a negative impact on productivity of fields, may promote pernicious weeds. So we worked with them to test that. Actually, neither of those are a problem. And the same with field margins. How do you design the mix, set them up to make sure you get a spillover of bees and natural enemies into your crops? Again, that was a co-design process, and these things really work. So to sort of bring all that together, the Showcase project, we're just starting on this journey. It's going to be 5 years, and we really hope we can engage with this audience and leaf growers and other growers as well. But our main things we're looking to bring to the grower community is new evidence on the balance of costs and benefits. We want to tip those benefits high, keep those costs down, and give you trusted solutions that will give you that. We want to design a co-development process that can apply not only to arable farms, but to the horticultural sector and livestock. And we want to understand from you, and we're going to be doing some survey work and interviews, what encourages you to do biodiversity positive work? We've had some great stories today. What are the incentives there? And particularly, what are the barriers? And what can we do to remove those barriers? Is it lack of knowledge, training, awareness? Is it financial constraints? If we can really characterize those, then we can try and pull those barriers away. And finally, what we want to do is work more widely with Leaf. There's so much information about managing biodiversity out there. There's some brilliant high quality stuff. There's some kind of confusing stuff. There's some contradictory stuff. We want to try and cut through that and come up with some kind of really simple, trustworthy kind of approaches to managing biodiversity, make it easy to make the right decisions because it is so complicated. I spent 35 years studying farm and biodiversity, and I still find it quite confusing, the amount of information and choices out there. But we think there is a way through that to try and bring it together in a kind of a simple, accessible form. So to finish, to say that we will be reaching out to the Leaf community more widely. Feel free to look at our website or contact myself or India, and we really hope we can work together with some of you guys in the future. And I'll leave it at that and hand back to Alice. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon, and really, yeah, interesting to draw on your wealth of experience. I really like from the discussions we've had already about biodiversity, the 4 different categories was quite, yeah, it was really good to sort of visualize that, and also, in some ways, good to hear it's still a bit of can be a bit of a confusing landscape still for you, as you said, but also that there's so much genuine sort of win-wins coming out of that. And I really liked what you said about starting to align in terms of the values and the certification and the schemes and also the genuine economic benefits of it. So really brilliant to get that overview, and I know we at Leaf are really looking forward to working more closely with that side of things to try and cut through and get some guidance in various different areas. So thank you. Claire, could we have some questions, please, for Andy, Simon, and I might, bring in Harriet and Tamsin as well if needed.
Brilliant, perfect. Thank you, Alice. So this might actually kind of tie in quite nicely with the previous field day that we hosted last month, but there's been a question about how does this also relate to the potential for carbon capture, having additional habitat on farm, etc. I guess it would be remiss not to talk about that. We did cover that quite a lot in the last one, as mentioned, but yeah, what are our thoughts on that?
Thanks, Claire. And I think, obviously all links together. Andy, I know you've done a bit of work with the carbon calculators, etc. How much does biodiversity and your sort of woodland and things play a part in that? Oh, we can't hear you, Andy. You're not on mute. No, that's a bit of a shame. Oh, that's better. Oh, no better. Oh, that's annoying. No. do you want to try going out and coming back in again, and I'll ask someone else in the meantime? Perfect, thanks then. Simon, do you have any thoughts on the sort of carbon impacts of biodiversity in areas?
Yeah, I do. And again, it's how do we seek these win-wins? So there's lots of ways to improve carbon on farm. And some of those will have a sort of quite a small impact on biodiversity, and some of them could have quite a large impact on biodiversity. And what we need to do is try and align those, so we can think about obvious things like sort of woodland and hedgerow regeneration. That can be a good thing, managing inputs. But we're lacking a kind of a sort of an integrated way to make those decisions. So the number of things you can do for carbon, the number of things you can do for biodiversity, the number of things you can do for production are quite overwhelming in some senses, that you have so many choices. We need good evidence, data and advice to really try and align those as close as we can together, because I think there should be a triple win there for production, biodiversity and carbon. And so we need, and that's really a shout out to say we need the tools. We have a carbon calculator, we have the beginnings of biodiversity assessments, and we have very good production metrics, but we haven't really brought them together yet. So I think there should be win-wins, but we need to work a bit harder to work out exactly what those are.
Yeah, better metrics in that space, I think, as you say. Thank you very much, Simon. Andy, can we try you again?
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Is that better?
Hooray, thank you.
Perfect. Sorry for scaring everyone. Alice in particular. I caught the tail end of what Simon said there. I think, we've put our figures into a carbon calculator, come up with a figure. It's early days for these calculators yet, isn't it? And we're sort of technically we're carbon negative. I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but that's what the figures say. So that's good if it's correct, but most of that is based on our soil organic matter levels. But we've got a bit of woodland and obviously some areas of environmental stewardship. So all of that plays a big part. But I think it's still early days for these calculators.
Thanks, Andy. And I think, interesting, the balance between what you've got now and then how that changes year on year and how that fits into the calculations. But yeah, it's definitely some win-wins there. Claire.
Thank you. Andy, can I put a question back to you, please? A few people have asked why your agroforestry strips are finishing before your headland.
That, I think someone mentioned it in the question there, that it is purely from a sort of efficiency point of view from the sprayer and the fertilizer spreader. What you couldn't see on that video was the fact that around the outside of that field we have got a 4 meter there will be a 4 metre wildflower margin around there as well. They won't, ideally they would interconnect, but just from an efficiency point of view, that's just not practical.
And I know a big part of it as well, Andy, you're looking at what beneficial insects you're going to try and promote within those strips. And I know from other work, there's various work on how, you know, how far those species can travel and areas like that, which hopefully you're creating some element of connected landscape as a sort of mesh, if you like, rather than lines. But yeah, interesting question. Yeah. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. So probably a question for Simon, if that's okay, but direct as you see fit, Alice. Where do we see the kind of dovetail or the complementary benefits of, say, private funding, and also with elms on the horizon? We don't quite know what that's going to look like yet. But yeah, kind of a question around the funding and the financial benefit opportunities. How does that research and elms on the horizon sit side by side?
Great question. And I'll be upfront and say, I think like many people, we're not quite sure what elms is going to include at this point. We've heard lots of high level suggestions and there's been lots of consultations. Certainly have an element of, you know, payment for public goods, and a lot of things that we do that can support iconic wildlife will actually also benefit our functional biodiversity as well. So it's about alignment. Can we introduce packages of measures on farm that, you know, protect and enhance production, but also deliver these benefits that can be, you know, provide access to agri-environment schemes, woodland regeneration schemes, and also elms in whatever form that's going to come to in the future. But I should also have that integrated into it is what is the kind of straight business model of getting your biodiversity right on farm, because that should be running in the engine all the time. And you should be thinking about how those things align up. So I hold my breath. I'm going to be delighted to see more concrete elements of elms as they come out. But from what I understand, there's going to be, you know, a clear way of rewarding for provision of public goods. And we need to think about how that can be aligned with private goods as well.
Thanks very much, Simon. And yeah, I think you put on a good point there. It's trying to do what's right for you and right for your farm business, and then looking at the sort of funding opportunities around that. And yes, join you with the bated breath on various aspects of that. Claire.
Thank you very much. Question here about how do you draw the balance between the habitat that you might want on your farm and actually what's right for the biodiversity needs, which are not necessarily the same thing. And I think this would be a great way to thread in, you know, the benefit of expert advice, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Brilliant question. And Tamsin, would you be happy to pick up on that in terms of the balance of those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the balance, it comes down to some extent to there's always going to be a personal feeling in there, and there are going to be things that you're prepared to do and actions that you're prepared to put in place, which may for another farmer in another business be way too onerous, but may work for your particular situation. So I think that some of that balance comes down to a personal thing, but I think also the balance between what you want and what might develop or might be possible from a biodiversity point of view, to some extent that is skewed by those kind of financial aspects. So there may be things that and that's why we've got these agri-environmental systems, and that's why we've got this whole idea of paying for public good, because sometimes there needs to be an additional benefit. So it may be that what you want is to cut your silage at the right time of year for silage, but what you might be being asked to do by the wider public and what might benefit biodiversity best and benefit corncrake or whatever on your farm is to leave that silage, and that's why you've got that kind of financial recompense for that disconnect between what you want and what's best for biodiversity. And I think sometimes the balance you can decide yourself, and sometimes you need to factor in those financial things as well. And that's why I think there is always going to need to be some degree of support system for that in whatever form that takes, which we all, indeed, even here in Scotland as well, we are also waiting to find out. So yeah, I think there's a level of personal assessment, but there's also that financial assessment as well. Does that answer the question? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. I'm going to go with yes, however I didn't ask it. But I think, yeah, and yeah, I think those kind of the trade-offs there, you know, there are win-wins, there are also trade-offs. So it's sort of managing both of those. And also you said something before about, you know, managing what you've got, tweaking it, which I really like that as a phrase, and then also looking to diversify. So, you know, going back to what we said before in Aberdeenshire, that's got to be the direction of travel. It's not about necessarily producing areas that you just want. It has got to work with biodiversity, but working with experts can help understand the you know, where there is flexibility and where there is scope to do some really exciting projects. And Andy has his hand up, so he wants to come in. Andy.
Yeah, just wanted to add that actually, from our experience, you know, we've had 2 rounds of ELS now, a bit of HLS, and then we're halfway through mid-tier, and it's only sort of by doing that do you find out what works on your farm, because not everything works, and we're now, you know, slowly but surely finding out what you know, what works for us, what species work well, you know, what areas of the farm can we grow these different crops. So I think it's really important to it sort of naturally evolves, and I think, you know, I feel confident now that, you know, going into Elms, we're sort of in a much better place, sort of knowing what we want.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you. Claire.
We've had a great question come up and a wonderful opportunity to talk about from somebody who's new to farming or quite new to farming. How do we, it's asking, you know, how best to engage with neighbours, and I think this is a great way to kind of bring that cluster opportunity into the conversation and working at that landscape scale. So can our panel speak into that, please?
Thanks very much, Claire. Yes, and I've seen a few few comments on that, and some of our fantastic leaf mark and leaf demonstration farmers responding with some of their experience. So if you're not on the chat, then I'd have a look at that. I think Patrick was suggesting GWCT, and Marion Reagan talking about sort of having unofficial chats with your neighbour and finding common ground, which I think both fantastic pieces of advice. But yeah, if I can come to the panel, I guess starting with you, Harriet, is this something that you're keen, you know, you're doing already, or that you're keen to do more of, and any sort of thoughts or advice of how to go about working with neighbours in a biodiversity space?
Yeah, definitely something we're looking into. Actually, we were speaking to Tamsin just earlier this week about it, and sort of going around neighbours and chatting to them and seeing if, you know, if they would like to do a joint scheme with us, just to strengthen, you know, both our application for, you know, agri-environment scheme, but also, you know, to have a land scale effect, like Claire said. So yeah, definitely. And RSPB, you know, we've got somebody coming out to have a look and chat, and, you know, hopefully she'll be able to give us a bit more background about the area and projects that are going on, you know, in the local area that we wouldn't otherwise know about. So I think it is about speaking to these people and neighbours, and, you know, some of them might tell you to go away, but some of them might be a bit more helpful and want to do stuff with you, and you don't know that until you ask the question. So it's definitely about asking that question.
Great, thanks very much, Harriet. And yeah, I think Beamall mentioned that on the chat about just ask. What you can do is ask, and as you say, and they might have new ideas, different ideas, or they might not be interested. But yeah, we can get a comment maybe from Tamsin as well, and then I'll come to you, Andy.
Well, actually, because I live quite close to Harriet's farm, I think when we say we were talking about the neighbours, we'd have to say we were gossiping a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think it is very much that informal approach, which actually, as an advisor, I'm not always a fan of, because sometimes you turn up on a farm and you discover that everyone's had a chat all around, and oh yes, we heard you, you know. So I think there is that scope for chatting informally, but I think also just letting people see what you're doing. So if you try something and it works or it doesn't work, I think one of the best farmers that I've been able to work with around here is a guy who's really honest about stuff that screws up. I mean, he'll say he's just been pinning the tail on the donkey's backside. That's not exactly how he phrases it, but, you know, that's what he's happy to say, and that's really helpful to then talk to people about, well, could you do this on your farm and make it work, and how could we tweak it and change it, and what would work, and what will help to achieve the benefit. And I think that's quite often the best thing, is just that very honest, open kind of chat.
Thanks very much, Tamsin. Andy, do you have any thoughts about it down your way?
Yeah, one piece of advice that I would suggest is that you might use someone local. I mean, we've got a guy here on the farm who writes in our local parish magazine, and he writes it. It's called Walking with Wildlife, and he writes very well, and he's very educated and knows a lot about wildlife and what goes on. So I had a walk with him a couple of weeks ago and actually learned lots from him. So I think, you know, if there's someone like that in your area, that's always worth a look into, I think.
Great, thanks very much, Andy. And Simon, I know part of Showcase is, you know, is working with a group of farmers, not necessarily all interconnected, but any comments on the benefits of, you know, landscape scale, but in different landscapes and or within the same one, depending on your experience?
Yeah, just to frame that I've got a really bad echo. Let me turn off some of the big challenges for biodiversity can actually only be addressed at landscape scale. So that's things like connectivity. If we've got great sort of natural and semi-natural features in the landscape, then having a group of neighbouring farmers connect up their hedgerows, their field margins, or any kind of, you know, regeneration. If we can do that strategically, the added value is huge. And the other area where it's really important is particularly with water quality. So, you know, you've got, you know, a stream or water flowing through several farms, then, you know, you need everybody to work to the same kind of objectives, names. That's the only way to really, you know, deliver that kind of landscape level. And whether that's informally, which I think is fantastic, you know, peer-to-peer, some discussions, sharing knowledge, what works on your farm may work on mine. But also formally through the facilitation funds. It's a really great way of kind of coordinating, sharing knowledge, even sharing, you know, contractor time for particular bits of work and so on. It can deliver huge benefits that a single farm couldn't achieve. And particularly if we think about wildlife that ranges over wide areas, you know, think about raptors and some of the mammals and so on. And we need to be able to have that connectivity that a single farm can't provide on its own. There's connectivity within the farm, as in Andy's case, but sometimes we need to go beyond the farm as well. So big opportunities. I think ELMS may help there, but again, we'll have to wait and see.
Great, thanks very much, Simon. And I think just, yeah, we've seen a few different examples of organisations that help in this space. So I think Essex Wildlife on the chat. I know Oakbank, who've been working with Andy. I know they run a few groups, and GWCT, and also a lot of that goes through the facilitation fund. So some good, yeah, might be some people just to almost register interest if they have other people coming to them, might be worth doing. Claire, do you have a favourite final question or two? Or you're on mute, sorry, Claire.
Sorry, I was just saying you're putting me on the spot there. A great question here, getting quite specific in terms of infield habitat and biodiversity. Have any of the farmers or practitioners considered field boundary intersects for targeted fallow field corner opportunities?
That sounds specific, but like an interesting one. Andy, is that something you've come across, or we talked a bit about connectivity and that sort of thing?
Yeah, not something we necessarily do, I suppose, but it goes back to my last point, I suppose, really, that we are, you know, as we're moving forward, we're now sort of starting to make notes of areas on the farm where actually we could utilise for agri-environmental schemes, and I guess, yeah, those kind of intersects would be part of that. And
Simon, can I come to you? Have you got any experience of that particularly and benefits of it?
Yes, I think things like beetle banks were mentioned specifically, and certainly there's a spillover of beneficials into the field. I guess it's in the design and location of them. There are good places and not so good places to place them, both in terms of the biodiversity benefits, but also in terms of how you manage them, set them up and maintain them over time. Again, getting advice on these from local experts, I think, can be really helpful.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. I'll give you one. Are there any other final questions, Claire, you're hoping to get in?
No, you go ahead, Alice.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Claire. And thank you all to the fabulous questions, which we all have yeah, we get the chat, so we'll endeavour to get back to you if we didn't manage to get to the question. So we'll aim to get an answer to you. But thank you so much, as I say, for the questions, for your involvement, for your discussion. You know, for us, that's what really makes these sessions worthwhile and a good thing, because you know we can bring experiences and hopefully get you know, the talks from our fabulous speakers today kind of sparked off some ideas and thoughts, but it's really that discussion element that we're always keen to promote. So big thank you to you, the audience, for that. A massive thank you to our speakers for their time today and to put through those thoughts and ideas. For me, it's always inspiring to hear about so much action, you know, so many ideas, so much actually happening and going on. And we at Leaf, you know, we work a lot with leaf demonstration farms, and it's always fantastic to see, you know, to see the progress that's been made and the fantastic examples of things really working. What's also really exciting is to see something perhaps earlier on in the journey at the start. You know, Andy was talking about what he wants to do in a certain area. Harriet's starting the journey at Newsea and what that looks like in 5 years' time. And that's hopefully the opportunity that, you know, we'll get to see what that looks like and what you can do. So lots of people lots of examples of things that have happened, lots of things that are about to happen, and lots of great plans for that. And I really love a plan. So I really hope that we've brightened up your morning and given you something to think about. And if you'd like to get involved with any of the projects further or hear more from either me, India, Simon, or Harriet and Andy, Tamsin, as well as the other farmers and experts that we've got involved, then please do get in contact with us. And I'll put a slide up in a second with various emails, so do hang on if you want to have a look at that. Just another flag to pop your basis questions in the chat, if basis numbers in the chat if you'd like those. And yeah, I'm just going to finish with something that I very obviously stole from a webinar I watched the other day with Jake Fines, who was talking about biodiversity at Holcombe. And I really liked how he finished, which was about being open, being approachable, being transparent, and recognizing nature when you see it, which I think is just very much what we've been talking about today. You know, even with the working with other farmers locally, being open and being honest about what you're doing and what you're trying to do. So with that, I will leave you all, and thank you very much for joining, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Thank you.